In this portion of our journey, we're going to be traveling from only about mile marker on the rail trail 8.5 to around 9, which is where the intersection occurs between the railroad for the Champlain Valley Railroad and the Lamoille County Railroad. And that would be these two intersections. This is called Sheldon Junction for a variety of reasons. It is adaptly named, as in its beginning it was the intersection or junction between a series of highways, the first one being the St. Albans to Richford Highway, originally called the Plank Highway until the planks routed, and a road going south off of this road into Fairfield, on another road going off in a northwesterly direction away from the junction back towards Highgate and Swanton. And a short distance up the road was another road going to Franklin. So this area indeed was the intersection or the junction of a number of roads. It's also the junction or the intersection of the only two major waterways in Sheldon, being the Black Creek and the Missisquoi River, with the Missisquoi River being a means of transport since way back in the beginning of time. And later it became the junction because it was the intersection of the two major railroads. The first one being the Portland to Ogdensburg Railroad, which ran from Portland, Maine to Ogdensburg, New York. And the other one being the St. Albans to Richford Railroad, which ran from St. Albans, Vermont into Richford and into other various locations. So Sheldon Junction was indeed the junction or the hub of a lot of transportation activity in Franklin County and in the town of Sheldon. We will take a close look at its history. We are currently approaching Route 105, which is the new road from St. Albans to Sheldon, a state highway built after the old Richford to St. Albans highway had been abandoned. And instead of making the wide arc to my left and coming around behind this house, the highway now has been moved over here. So we're going to proceed over, across the road, and to the bridge. When we arrive at Route 105, rather than proceeding, if we turn to the right and take a short walk up, we will come to one of 3 signs erected by the state of Vermont commemorating significant historical events in the state. This one is about the Fenian raids, which occurred in 1866 and again in 1870. To speak too much of this would require a complete separate video, and perhaps at some point in time between us and our Canadian neighbors we may decide to do that. The Fenians were a group of Irish liberators who sought to invade Canada for the purpose of primarily punishing England for the way it had treated the Irish in Europe, and secondarily to overthrow the British formed Canadian government and to set up a new Irish republic in the New World. Obviously this effort failed, although there are a number of history lessons and stories in the period of time that we're covering here and the efforts that were undertaken. Again, this map shows Sheldon Junction from the 1871 map produced by Beers. And I'm going to blow it up here a little bit for you because the 2 places I'm interested in you seeing and taking a look at are right here. This would be The Missisquoi Valley House or Missisquoi Valley Hotel. It was one of many hotels built in Sheldon during the prime time of the Mineral Springs boom. And this one would be Sheldon Depot, or the train station in Sheldon, which was here before you go across the bridge. Many people thought it was over here at the actual intersection of the junction of the two railways, but in fact it was here. So if you notice that this is the railway going across the Missisquoi at this point in time right here. And this is a roadway, according to Beers, also going across the river right next to the railroad tracks and staying pretty well with it all the way out past what we'll be talking about as the fairgrounds. This road going into Sheldon down to this point is wandering completely along the west side of the Missisquoi River until it gets to the current Bouchard Road, where it crosses over to Black Creek. We'll be seeing some pictures of this later. This is known as McInerney Corners. Taking a close look at this map, and then we will move on to taking a closer look at some of the properties that are here. This photograph is of the Missisquoi Valley House, which I pointed out to you on the map, and was located in Sheldon Junction. Would have been right off of Route 105, apparently in the vicinity near the current Marie Brouillette farm. Notice it's a pretty good sized structure, being 3 stories plus part of another one. It's got a couple of 3 chimneys on it for heat. And you can actually see some people who are sitting on the front steps. And if we look real close over here, we'll see a horse and buggy. Now this was probably taken near the end of the 1800s, sometime after the Beers map, and sometime definitely before the 1927 flood. This is a tourist house, and looking at it from a close-up and from this perspective is important from the point of view of waiting until we get to the next picture. Looking at the Missisquoi house becomes important for us in order to identify some of the features of this particular old photograph. This area on the right-hand side right here is the Missisquoi Valley House. Let me bring that up so you can take a closer look at it and assure yourself that in fact that is the Missisquoi Valley House. And looking at it right there, we'll make it even a little bigger. Okay, this is the Missisquoi Valley House, as the same picture that you saw before from practically the same angle. Now there's some interesting things happening in this picture, because right here, difficult to see, is a train locomotive appearing very much to be a steam engine due to its construction, with somewhat of a train behind it. Now this is a stereoscopic view. There's another piece over here, but we're only looking at this portion of it. The other part that's important to take a look at is here. I'll take this down a little bit first. This group from here to here is an interesting find, and we'll bring it up even a little farther and see if we can actually see anything about it in this video. But right here, these are men. Okay, these are people. What these men are doing is building a bridge. And it is the bridge that would then go over and join the east and the west sides of the Missisquoi River in Sheldon Junction. I can't give you an exact date for this, although it was after the railroad was built. So I'm doubting that it was a railway bridge. I'm more or less thinking it was a second covered bridge. But these are long, long timbers going all the way from way back here in the picture all the way straight through to the other side, showing a considerable size for this particular bridge span. And that's exactly how they were being built in the 1800s. And when the train reached this point, it would be slowing down on this curve to negotiate that bridge, which is the bridge going across the Missisquoi River into Sheldon Junction. We'll take a closer look at that when we get up there. We've arrived at the bridge, but what you're not able to see until I go down this side path is the fact that the road here, the roadbed for the railroad, actually crossed over what would have been the old St. Albans to Richford Highway, running right here along the river, going under the underpass here, proceeding up the highway, proceeding up along the river here, would have gone under the underpass and would have continued up on this side of the river until it met the covered bridge. We'll get a better view of where that would be off the bridge itself. This is the old underpass looking from south of the railroad bridge back towards the Route 105 bridge. The old road came down through here, passed along this side of the river, proceeded down this side of the river, but actually turned here and went toward McEnany Corners, which is where that barn is that you're seeing directly ahead. Halfway between here and there, we'll show it to you on a different road. There's two abutments left, one on one side of the river and one on the other. So approximately there is where the old road covered bridge and then the concrete bridge stood until they realigned Route 105 and built the new bridge. Although this originally was a wooden covered bridge, it burned, or I know it got burned and then it got destroyed by floods after that. And they built this steel bridge for the railroad, which you're seeing in existence right now. I can give you a date another time, but the Canadian Pacific Railroad took over the CVRR and used this to transport from Canada into the United States. And as you can see, it's a different span, short distance, the last span going into Sheldon Junction. One of the trains jumped off the tracks and took that part of the bridge out. We do have an article about that on our website. These next two shots, you're looking at two separate maps. The first one being the Beers map from 1871, and the second one being a U.S. Geological Survey map from 1916. So these maps are only 45 years apart from each other. The Beers map is highly detailed in a hand-drawn kind of fashion, with railroads and everything else marked into it. However, when you get to the other map, which is also of Sheldon Junction, this is the U.S. Geological Survey's map of Sheldon, including Sheldon Junction. If I bring that up a little higher for you, we can identify this is Sheldon Springs. And let's get over here a little further if we can. We're moving over a little further. Right here is North Sheldon. So right down here is Sheldon, and right here is Sheldon Junction. Now, one of the reasons I want you to see this is you can see a road and a highway going right here, which is pretty much the same location that we were talking about for the railroad. However, when the road gets here, instead of proceeding the full distance along the west shore with no intersections on it, it has an intersection right here, which we will show you near the end of the video. And this was the road leading from the west side to the east side, vice versa, across the Missisquoi River at Sheldon Junction. This was first originally a covered bridge, We'll get to those pictures. And later was replaced, I believe, by a second covered bridge, and then finally by a steel bridge, and then finally eliminated entirely. This area right here is the one we're concentrating on. Here's your Missisquoi River, making a bend in the river right here, going back toward North Sheldon, and right here is what we call the Black Creek. So right here's the second railroad, and here's the first railroad. This map is a survey map. Actually, it's only half of a survey map of approximately a 3-mile stretch of Route 105 that the state of Vermont decided it would replace in Sheldon. If you look real close, here's the Missisquoi River, here's the railroad bridge, here's the new proposed bridge. This dotted line right here going across under the railroad bridge passes where I showed you that 1940 truck transversing, which may have been going all the way down here to Sheldon proper, or it may have crossed the long bridge here and gone into Sheldon Junction at the other side. Otherwise it would have proceeded all the way down to Sheldon Village. So the state decided to replace this roadway with a new roadway and a new bridge. The resolution passed. The bridge was constructed in 1948. There are some significant markings on this particular map. In as much as you're looking at, here's the river. This is a road, and this is called the Fay Chadwick location, and in fact was continuing to be the Chadwick farm into the 21st century. This little juncture right here is going to be where Route 78 turns to the left back toward Swanton. And this is the property of Phil Bergeron alongside the railroad. And let's see, here's Daniel, here's Donner. These are all houses we're talking about and other locations that the state drew in on this particular map. In this picture, what we're looking at is what was the Long Bridge or the Main Street Bridge. Now it would have connected the two sides of the Missisquoi River at Sheldon Junction. If you look closely at the picture, it is a covered bridge. If you look down here closely, you can see in fact that it was a road bridge as opposed to a railroad bridge, since the road leads up to it. This in fact is the bridge that is no longer there. We'll point that out to you later. It would have been just south, excuse me, just I guess we're going to have to say upriver from the existing rail trail bridge, and definitely a long ways upriver from the current Route 105 bridge. Our information has that this was built in 1887. The Missisquoi Railroad Bridge had already been built, and it crossed the Missisquoi River near Sheldon Junction. It was supposedly 148 feet long, although it does look longer, costing $13,000 to build. And it remained in this location intact until the flood of 1927. In this picture, we're looking at a shot from 1940. This is a truck going under the underpass, which was on the old Main Street location going into Sheldon from Sheldon Junction. This road would have come off of what we thought of as Route 105, circled, went down underneath the existing bridge. This is the railroad bridge when it was used as a railroad, under here, and then further down over into Sheldon Creek, or crossing the Main Street Bridge and going into Sheldon Junction. The other one that we're looking at is this one. which was called a narrow bridge. Okay, it is to some degree the reason why in 1948 the state decided to build a new bridge in Shelton Junction to accommodate traffic, which had become much wider and much heavier than what existed back at the time when bridges were originally built. So if you're looking at past 1927 to 1940, you're looking at a bridge that looked like this that the state built. Not a lot of room. Structure was good, it stood well, but in a minute we're going to see it didn't stand there forever. And it didn't provide what modern transportation needed. If we take a look at this a little closer, this is shot from approximately the same location, only back further, and there's your bridge. Unfortunately, the bridge is surrounded by water. Okay, and this occurred somewhere around, it was after 27, or somewhere around in the early 1940s. And the bridge, after the state built it following the 27 flood, again got washed out. There were people at that time looking at possibilities for being able to offer some, I suppose, aid or rescue to the flood and the power of one of the reasons for having this in is these gentlemen are looking at a bridge, and right directly below them you can see is the railroad bridge. So it's a pretty good shot of the location telling you that when this flood occurred, the two bridges were already in place at Shelton Junction. We do not have any pictures of the railroad being crossed at the time of the covered bridges, but of course photography wasn't prevalent at that particular time. However, in this picture, you can see that indeed this is the Missisquoi River, and this is indeed the Missisquoi River Railroad Bridge in 3 spans built of steel. So it would have been after the CVRL Railroad Bridge burned at an earlier time. We do know that there were 2 bridges that burned, one being this one and the other being the Lamoille Valley, which we'll talk about soon. This one burned immediately following the time that 2 trains crossed it. Now the trains would be of this nature. They would be either coal or wood, they would be bellowing black smoke, and they would be shooting sparks. So it is not too unusual for covered bridges of this type to have burned, and in fact this one did burn. According to a report from the St. Albans Messenger on June 14th, 1990, the Central Vermont Railroad Bridge over the Missisquoi River in Shelton Junction was burned shortly after 10 o'clock. It was the longest bridge on the Missisquoi division of the Central Vermont, and though built of wood, still had an approximate value of around $15,000. It was said to be 459 feet and 3 spans of 147 feet 6 inches each, with approachways. It was called a through wooden or covered bridge. We don't actually know how the fire started, but there had been an excursion train bearing a large number of Wallace Circus people into St. Albans, just passed over the bridge, as well as a regular train which arrived in St. Albans at 10:30. So we can see probably what the cause of the burning of the bridge was. This is the same bridge, having been built and being running, and what we're looking at right here is a diesel locomotive running into out of the bridge. So the bridge survived And this one is going to be going from, apparently looking from here, the east end, going across to the west end of the Missisquoi. Let's move up and take a look at the next one, which is this bridge. Now you're looking at the last span of the bridge, and this is a Canadian Pacific, or actually Canadian Railroad vehicle or boxcar. The Canadian Railroad started shipping an immense amount of freight through Vermont using this railroad as a means by which to get it to southern New England locations. 1984 is when this accident occurred, and you notice that it pretty well crippled that span of the bridge. After the boxcar was removed, this span of the bridge was removed, and it was left that way for a number of years until individuals of interest in turning this into a walking rail trail purchased a span to cover the river at this point. We are now about halfway across the bridge. We're in the second large structure, and dead ahead you can see more clearly the part that was built after the train accident and when the bridge was re-decked for the purposes of making a rail trail. Although it doesn't appear on the 1871 maps of Sheldon, which are the first records we can come across, right at this site there stood something called the Riverside Hotel. Refer to our website and give you information about what it was and when it was used. As you move over the middle of the bridge and go over to the left, in this area here, there was a number of different enterprises, including stores, post offices, and Goodspeed's Hotel. We'll discuss that further on the website. As we exit the bridge, we are coming into Sheldon Junction proper, and it was properly named because this would be the intersection of the what used to be the St. Albans to Franklin Railroad and the Lamoille Railroad, and the junction will be just ahead of us where the two railroads actually met. So this was a railroad junction. What is currently Bordeaux Brothers is a site that previously, until the early 70s, had been occupied by the Hood Creamery, who moved to St. Albans and became the St. Albans Co-op Creamery, and prior to that was known as the United Farm Workers Co-op. A good deal of that information is available on our website. We've crossed over the bridge at this point, this being the bridge coming down through from Missisquoi Rail Trail, and then right here is the Lamoille. Well, the reason I have this in is to take a little closer look at Sheldon Junction. Right here is Martin, looks like Martin's store, and up here is the Goodrich Hotel, and a few houses, but not a whole lot of them. The junction itself produced a lot of transportation industry and helped to serve farmers in the area, but was not a highly residential area as such. This is the original picture we were showing you, and that insert is just this piece right here. It was a later map. In addition to other things, there was in Sheldon Junction a post office, and the post office handled mail from all over. This cover happens to be one that is coming from New York City, addressed to someone who is residing at the Riverside Hotel in Sheldon, Vermont. Perking our curiosity, the question was, what was the Riverside Hotel and where was it located? Come to find out, the Riverside Hotel was a riverside hotel because it was located next to the Missisquoi River. As you cross the bridge, what is currently the rail trail, immediately to your right as you're crossing over in that small parcel of low land is where the hotel was located. Now, it wasn't this one over here because this one is in New York City. But there was a hotel right there in addition to the Missisquoi Valley House. In addition, soon after we cross over the bridge, we're coming onto a road, which you're not going to see anything on it, but if you take a left and go out that road, you're going to come back out onto Route 105. Right near the Papa Noel's Pizza Parlor and the Creamy Stand. And directly over to the right is the intersection of Route 105 and State Route 78. And one of the buildings that occupied that particular property back in the early 1900s was a motel. And we have a picture from a postcard of that motel. And you can take a look at it and see that we're talking here older automobiles. It was Phillips Motel. Okay, the coffee shop. They say air conditioning. You could do all kinds of things here. I do remember when this was a motel. It continued to survive as a motel for a number of years. Passed through several hands. And after some period of time did deteriorate, but eventually was purchased by someone and turned into housing. So this is another picture of the same motel location, a little bit more difficult to see, but it also, in addition to everything else, includes the view of the home which stands here. So if you were standing there right now and looking, you would see something very similar to this. Although it is a fairly old location, it continues to exist at that Sheldon Junction venture to this day. As we came back across from Route 105, down the road we walked through what would be known as the Bordeaux Brothers Feed and Grain Company. This is a company that was taken over by Bordeaux Brothers in around 1972 and transformed from a locally franchised business into a much larger state and area-wide business and continues in existence through this time. This picture shows an original railroad train passing through Sheldon Junction at the feed facility, which continues to be there, but at that point in time it was known as Wayne Feeds. Located in Sheldon Junction at approximately the location of the current Bordeaux Brothers Feed and Fertilizer Company, previously Wayne Feeds, was the original United Farm Workers Cooperative Creamery of Sheldon Junction. Milk was in demand. Milk was not yet pasteurized. Milk was not yet being afforded the opportunity to be chilled, and so therefore farmers would bring their milk to the nearest creamery as soon as possible. It was therefore not unusual for there to be creameries at Sheldon Junction, Sheldon Village, North Sheldon, South Franklin, Enosburg, all kinds of locations, and many of them were organized and developed by the United Cooperative Farm Group to keep some of the enterprise of processing and selling milk in the hands of the farmers. This is a series of pictures taken in, I believe, around 1951 and are now housed at the Library of Congress and available through their archives free to anyone who wants to have them. So this is apparently a mixing tank. This would be a whole series of milk cans. At that particular time, of course, milk was not being piped. Milk was being taken care of in cans. And here are your milk cans. Well, the farmer would milk, get the milk into cans, filter it as well as he could, and then bring it to the creamery. And then it would be offloaded at the creamery by a worker, and it would be put through the process of getting ready to put it up for resale. And these are all pictures of people who were in the process of doing that. As I posted this at an earlier time, some of these individuals are the grandfathers, great uncles, so forth, of people who continue to reside in Sheldon, even though they can't remember the creamery. Once the creamery was no longer considered to be of a profit, it was in fact closed. But before being closed, it was sold to the H.P. Hood Company. H.P. Hood Company bought the business of a number of creameries and moved all of that into St. Albans, Vermont, where it eventually transpired into the St. Albans Cooperative Creamery. If you were inclined to ride on the St. Johnsbury and Lake Champlain Railroad, or what has become known as the Lamoille Valley Railroad, you need a ticket. So here is one ticket good for continuous passage from East Highgate and Sheldon, Vermont. It is one of the few tickets that we have. And this would be the rail ticket that you would use if you were hoping to travel between East Fairfield and Sheldon. Good for one continuous passage. I can't give you an exact date on these, but there was rail passenger service definitely during the Mineral Springs boom and up through most likely the mid-1900s before the passenger rail was deserted. Where we're standing right now is at mile marker number 9 on the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail. It is also the intersection of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, which is currently under construction. The bridge that we just crossed is back here, and this area right here is the backside of what is known as Borgo Brothers. We are going to proceed down this trail toward what will be the Lamoille Valley Rail Trails Bridge. We are right now looking at what is the former casino at the end of what is Casino Road off of Route 105. This road over here leading to the Missisquoi River is what is known as the old Main Street, and directly ahead is the Lamoille Valley new rail trail development. We are now approaching what used to be the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail Bridge, which is now being rebuilt from the railroad to the walking trail. Having traveled down the trail from Sheldon Junction to what is currently remodeled as being the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail Bridge, hopefully be open in 2019. That bridge originally was spanned with a covered bridge, or I mean the river actually. The bridge that's there today is a metal bridge built after this particular bridge burned. This is a series actually of 6, I believe, unique photographs, which were really very small when they were originally given to us, so we've enlarged them to some extent. But this is a sequence of events, including from the very beginning of knowing that this bridge had caught fire up until the time it burned and fell into the Missisquoi River. Now here's one picture. In this picture, you're beginning to see some of the charred away remains and perhaps some of the debris falling. Having traveled down the trail from Sheldon Junction to what is currently remodeled as being the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail Bridge, hopefully be open in 2019. That bridge originally was spanned with a covered bridge, or I mean the river actually. The bridge that's there today is a metal bridge built after this particular bridge burned. This is a series actually of 6, I believe, unique photographs, which were really very small when they were originally given to us, so we've enlarged them to some extent. But this is a sequence of events, including from the very beginning of knowing that this bridge had caught fire up until the time it burned and fell into the Missisquoi River. Now here's one picture. In this picture, you're beginning to see some of the charred away remains and perhaps some of the debris falling. We are now back from the Lamoille Bridge to the road that would have led from Sheldon Junction, where I'm standing now, directly ahead to the Missisquoi River, over what would have been known as the Long Bridge or the Missisquoi Main Street Bridge. Go a little closer and take a look. As we near the river's edge, we can look back and see that this is the bridge we were on a short time ago, which was the previous railroad bridge crossing over the Missisquoi. We are at this point at the banks of the Missisquoi River, at the point where the Main Street or Long Bridge crossed from near that telephone pole over to here. We'll take a picture, look at that picture in a short period of time. The river flowing in this direction back towards the railroad bridge, and the river going back through over towards the bridge we were at a short time ago, which is right about there. And then directly ahead here is McEnany Corners. We're gonna go back the way we came, return to the 9-mile mark, and continue our journey on another day. Having proceeded down the Lamoille River, the Lamoille Railroad, down to this point here where there's a bridge, and back up, and then having explored this area from approximately here over to what would have been the Main Street Bridge, we're now back here, and having proceeded back to this point right here, we now are back at mile marker number 9 on the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, and we will be proceeding in an easterly direction shortly in the next sequence and segment going over here. Notice that says Fairgrounds. We'll talk about that soon.